There's supposed to be a little voice in your head, a tiny built-in survival system, a whisper that says, "Don't touch that. Don't jump that. Don't put that in your mouth. Don't settle a sports argument with venom." Most people hear that voice and, at minimum, pause. The 10 people in tonight's video apparently had that voice surgically removed, because these are not random accidents. These are not tragedies caused by terrible luck. These are moments when human beings looked directly at common sense, locked eyes with it, and said, "No thanks, I'm gonna freestyle." Tonight, we're looking at 10 catastrophic brain glitches, 10 moments where pride, boredom, ego, hormones, and pure chemical stupidity teamed up against the most basic instincts of self-preservation. Think of this as a survival guide in reverse, a highlight reel of what happens when your inner warning system clocks out early and leaves your body unsupervised. Let's begin with two men who took a cricket argument and somehow escalated it all the way to venom-based conflict resolution, because apparently yelling wasn't dramatic enough. Case 1. The scorpion duel. Most arguments about sports end the same way. A little shouting, maybe some finger pointing, maybe one guy storms off and spends the next 3 days telling everyone the match was rigged. That is the normal human range of behavior. Farouk and Khalid were not operating within the normal human range of behavior. Their disagreement began on a dusty cricket field in Pakistan, where one accused the other of cheating. Now, in fairness, that is a serious accusation in any competitive setting. Pride was involved, honor was involved, masculinity, that ancient and deeply unreliable fuel source, was definitely involved. But there were options here. They could have argued, they could have replayed the point, they could have stopped speaking to each other and become dramatic for a few weeks like civilized people. Instead, they invented a new and deeply stupid form of arbitration, a duel. Not with fists, not with sticks, not even with knives, with live, venomous scorpions. Now, for anyone unfamiliar with scorpions from that region, these are not novelty pets or spicy little insects you flick away with a sandal. These things are basically nature's syringe guns, equipped with venom that can attack the nervous system, wreck the body, and turn a macho standoff into a medical emergency with astonishing efficiency. The rules of the duel were simple, which is often the first sign that a plan is catastrophically bad. Each man would hold a live scorpion. Whoever got stung first would be declared the loser. Yes, that was the system. No referee, no logic. Just two grown men standing in front of a confused crowd, each gripping an angry, venomous arachnid in the name of sportsmanship. This was not conflict resolution. This was two idiots trying to use toxic wildlife as a lie detector. They faced off, tense, sweating, proud. And then, because physics, biology, and irony all love working overtime, both men were stung almost simultaneously. For one brief second, there was likely a shared look between them, a silent exchange that said something like, "Wow, this may have been a terrible call." Then the venom got to work. They collapsed, both of them, convulsing, failing, and discovering way too late that there are easier ways to settle a cricket argument than mutual poisoning. Neither won, neither proved anything, except that if your dispute resolution strategy involves live scorpions, you are no longer in a debate. You are in the opening scene of your own obituary. In the end, the question of who cheated at cricket was never answered, but the larger question was, who was dumber? Turns out, it was a tie. Case 2. The Backyard Raccoon War. Suburbs are supposed to be peaceful. Green lawns, bird feeders, quiet mornings with coffee, and the comforting illusion that you are in control of your property. And then a raccoon shows up. For most homeowners, a raccoon stealing birdseed is a mild annoyance. You buy a stronger feeder, maybe set a humane trap, maybe just accept that you now have a tiny masked burglar living nearby. Bob, however, took this personally. To Bob, this wasn't wildlife. This was war. The enemy was a raccoon, about 10 pounds, armed primarily with curiosity and sticky little hands. Bob's response was not proportionate. Instead of solving the problem like a normal adult, Bob decided to design a trap. Not just any trap, an engineering project so unnecessarily complicated that even Wile E. Coyote would have looked at it and said, "Buddy, Dial it back. In the sacred laboratory of his garage, Bob constructed what he proudly believed was the ultimate raccoon capturing machine. Picture this: a tripwire, a spring-loaded net, and the launch mechanism? A blank shotgun shell. Yes, Bob decided the appropriate response to a raccoon eating sunflower seeds was munitions-grade pest control. The plan was simple. The raccoon touches the wire, the blank shell fires, the net launches into the air and traps the furry criminal. Elegant, over-engineered, completely insane. Bob spent hours setting it up in the yard that evening, adjusting tension, testing the wire, admiring the masterpiece of suburban warfare he had created. Satisfied with his invention, he went to bed dreaming of victory. Somewhere nearby, the raccoon was probably also asleep, completely unaware it had triggered a Cold War arms race with a man who owned a toolbox. Morning came. Bob woke up, made coffee, looked out the window. Bird feeder looked a little low, so he did what people do every morning. He walked outside. And because the human brain is a fragile and unreliable device, Bob had completely forgotten about the explosive raccoon trap he installed just hours earlier. With the cheerful confidence of a man walking directly into his own ambush, Bob stepped into the yard. His foot snagged the tripwire. For one brief moment, his brain probably tried to remember something important. Too late. Boom. The blank shell fired. The net launched. Bob was instantly wrapped in his own invention, like a burrito made of regret. The force knocked him backward, and his flight path intersected perfectly with a heavy stone bird bath, which, in a cruel twist of suburban irony, was the very thing he had been trying to protect. The impact ended Bob's career as an amateur engineer. And the raccoon? The raccoon likely watched the entire thing from a nearby tree before calmly climbing down and enjoying breakfast. Because in the suburbs, the most dangerous animal isn't the one with the striped tail, it's the one with the toolbox and a bad idea. Case 3. The beer heist versus tempered glass. Every great criminal plan has 3 steps. Step 1. Get the thing. Step 2. Escape. Step 3. Don't die immediately afterward. Dave had successfully completed Step 1. Step 2 did not go as well. Our story begins inside a small convenience store late at night, the natural habitat of bad decisions. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, refrigerators humming quietly, shelves full of snacks designed for people who stopped making good choices around 11 p.m. Dave walked in with a mission: beer. Specifically, free beer. Now, stealing a case of beer from a convenience store is not exactly Ocean's 11. It's the kind of crime that typically ends in 2 ways. You run out the door and get away, or the clerk yells something like, "Hey," and you awkwardly pretend you forgot your wallet. Dave chose option 3, panic. He grabbed the case from the cooler and bolted for the exit like a running back who just stole the playbook. Unfortunately, between him and freedom stood the store clerk, a man paid just enough to care about someone sprinting toward the door with 12 unpaid beverages. The clerk shouted one simple word, "Hey!" And Dave's brain instantly shut down. You know how computers freeze when too many programs are open? That's what happened to Dave's mind. His thoughts collapsed into one desperate command: run. He saw the exit, glass doors, beyond them, freedom, the night sky, victory. What Dave failed to notice in this adrenaline-powered moment of genius was one critical detail: the door was closed. Now let's pause for a quick physics lesson. Glass, despite being transparent, is still very much solid. In fact, convenience store doors are made of tempered safety glass, specifically engineered to stop people from doing exactly what Dave was about to do. Dave, however, was no longer processing information. He lowered his head, clutched the case of beer to his chest like a football, and sprinted, full speed, directly into the door. There was no slow-motion realization, no graceful stumble, just a violent, final collision between a panicked thief and a perfectly stationary object. The sound echoed through the quiet store. The glass did not move. Dave did, but only briefly. The force of the impact snapped his neck instantly. The case of beer slipped from his arms, cans rolling across the linoleum floor, fizzing softly as if the store itself was quietly celebrating. The clerk reportedly stood there for several seconds, staring at the scene. Because sometimes life presents you with a problem, and gravity solves it for you. Dave never made it outside. But he did prove one important thing. If your escape plan involves sprinting through a closed glass door, you probably weren't going to get away with the beer anyway. Case 4. The anchor problem. Treasure hunting sounds glamorous. Sunken ships, lost gold, forgotten cargo waiting patiently on the ocean floor. In reality, most underwater salvage is less Pirates of the Caribbean and more two guys with tools trying to cut scrap metal off a rusty wreck, which is exactly what Marco and Paolo were doing. The brothers had started a small freelance operation recovering valuable copper and metal from old shipwrecks. No permits, no official supervision, just two divers, a cutting torch, and the timeless entrepreneurial strategy of grab shiny things and sell them later. Their latest target was an old wreck resting quietly on the seabed. Nothing dramatic, just a massive steel carcass slowly being reclaimed by the ocean. But to Marco and Paolo, it was a gold mine, or more accurately, a copper mine. They brought their tools, descended into the dark water, and began cutting pieces of metal from the hull, using high-temperature underwater torches. Now, if you've never seen one of these torches operate, they are extremely impressive. They burn at temperatures high enough to slice through thick steel like butter, which is fantastic, as long as you are not accidentally heating something important. Unfortunately, Marco and Paolo had chosen a work location with one small oversight. Directly above them hung the ship's massive anchor. This was not a decorative anchor. This was a multi-ton block of iron designed to keep an entire ship from drifting across the ocean, and it was hanging from a chain that had been sitting underwater for decades. Rusty, weak, barely holding together. Now, let's review 3 basic principles of physics. First, cutting torches make metal extremely hot. Second, old rusted metal becomes weaker when heated. Third, and this is the big one, gravity never takes a day off. As the brothers worked, the heat from their torches traveled slowly up the metal structure of the wreck, and eventually, into the anchor chain. The chain began heating, weakening, stretching, link by link. But they had also accidentally cut the only thing preventing several tons of iron from collapsing on top of them. In the end, they did become part of the wreck, which is a very efficient way to retire from the salvage industry, because when gravity finally joins the conversation, the negotiation is already over. Case 5. The selfie with the most venomous octopus on Earth. Australia is a beautiful country. Stunning beaches, crystal clear tide pools, incredible wildlife. Also, roughly 60% of that wildlife is capable of killing you if you handle it incorrectly. Which brings us to Jessica. Jessica was visiting the Australian coast, exploring a rocky tide pool, the kind tourists love because it looks like a miniature underwater aquarium. Little fish, shells, brightly colored sea creatures, and, if you know what you're looking at, some of the most dangerous animals on the planet. Jessica, however, was not looking for danger. Jessica was looking for content. Her brain was operating in what scientists call Instagram mode, meaning everything she saw was instantly evaluated with one question: would this get likes? And that's when she spotted it. A tiny octopus sitting in the shallow water. Small, beautiful, flashing bright electric blue rings across its body. To someone familiar with ocean wildlife, this is the equivalent of a giant neon sign that says, "Do not touch this, ever." Because that creature was a blue-ringed octopus, one of the most venomous animals on Earth. Its venom contains a powerful neurotoxin capable of shutting down the human nervous system in minutes. And here's the fun part. There is no anti-venom. To a survival-minded human, those glowing blue rings mean one thing: back away slowly. But Jessica's brain did not interpret the warning. Jessica saw aesthetic. She leaned down into the tide pool, scooped the tiny octopus gently out of the water, and placed it on her arm. Perfect lighting, perfect background, perfect selfie. The octopus, meanwhile, had just been picked up by a giant, unpredictable mammal, which it understandably interpreted as a threat. And when blue-ringed octopuses feel threatened, they bite. The bite is incredibly small, often painless. So painless, in fact, that many victims don't even realize it happened. Jessica certainly didn't. She snapped several photos, admired the colors, probably tried a couple different angles. Satisfied with her work, she gently placed the octopus back in the water, then stood up and walked away. For a few moments, everything seemed fine. Then the tingling started. First in her lips, then her fingers. Her muscles began to weaken. Her breathing slowed. The toxin was doing exactly what evolution designed it to do: shut down the nervous system. Within minutes, Jessica collapsed on the beach, unable to move, unable to breathe. The tiny animal she had treated like a decorative prop had already finished its job, and somewhere on her phone remained the final image she took. A beautiful photo. Bright blue rings glowing against her skin. A perfect social media moment. And a perfect reminder that sometimes nature doesn't need claws or teeth to win. Sometimes it just needs a creature the size of a golf ball, and a human who thinks everything is a photo opportunity. Case 6. The honey-covered performance artist. Art is supposed to challenge people, make them think, push boundaries. But occasionally, art also raises a different question. Why would anyone think this was a good idea? Enter Lorenzo, an Italian performance artist who believed true art required complete immersion in nature. Not metaphorically, literally. Lorenzo didn't want to paint nature. He didn't want to photograph nature. He wanted to become part of nature. Which sounds poetic until you hear the actual plan. His newest artistic project was meant to represent the deep connection between humanity and the natural world. To demonstrate this bond, Lorenzo decided he would cover his entire body in honey and lie down on top of a massive ant colony. Yes, that was the concept. According to Lorenzo, this would symbolize harmony between species. According to literally anyone else with survival instincts, it symbolized feeding yourself to insects. But Lorenzo was committed to the vision. He purchased several jars of organic honey, because apparently, if you're going to make a fatal mistake, you might as well make it artisanal. He found a large active anthill in a field, a thriving colony, thousands upon thousands of ants moving in organized chaos, a literal insect metropolis. Then the performance began. With the seriousness of a man unveiling a masterpiece, Lorenzo removed his clothes and slowly coated his entire body with thick, sticky honey. Head to toe. Golden. Glistening. Basically transforming himself into the most attractive buffet item in the entire insect kingdom. He approached the anthill, laid down across it, closed his eyes, and waited for the spiritual connection to begin. The ants did not hesitate. For them, this was not art. This was Thanksgiving. Within seconds, thousands of ants swarmed his body, happily collecting honey and enthusiastically biting the large, warm animal that had just delivered dessert directly to their doorstep. At first, Lorenzo probably expected mild discomfort. Maybe a few bites. Maybe a philosophical moment about coexistence. Instead, his body began reacting violently. Because Lorenzo had one tiny biological detail he didn't know about. He had a severe allergy to ant venom. More specifically, the formic acid delivered through thousands of tiny bites. His immune system didn't just react, it completely panicked. Within minutes, Lorenzo went into full anaphylactic shock. His skin erupted in hives. His throat began swelling shut. Breathing became nearly impossible. The peaceful expression of artistic enlightenment quickly turned into pure panic. But by the time help arrived, the reaction had already shut his body down. His performance piece had an extremely abrupt ending. Authorities later found a very confusing scene. A naked man covered in honey, thousands of ants still enjoying the buffet, and absolutely no art critics present to explain what exactly they were looking at. Lorenzo had wanted to connect with nature, and in a way, he succeeded. He just forgot one important rule about the natural world. Nature doesn't care about your concept. It just cares about whether you're edible. Case 7. The "don't worry, it's not loaded" prank. There are a few universal rules when it comes to firearms. Rules so simple that even children are taught them. Rule number 1. Always treat a gun as if it's loaded. Rule number 2. Never point it at something you aren't willing to destroy. Rule number 3. Keep your finger off the trigger unless you actually intend to fire. These rules exist for one reason, because when you ignore them, the consequences are immediate and permanent. Gary, unfortunately, believed these rules were more like suggestions. He and his friend Kevin were hanging out in a basement in Illinois, doing what countless bored people do when they run out of productive ideas. They started messing around with things they shouldn't. In this case, a handgun. Now, Kevin was sitting casually nearby, probably assuming that his friend had at least the minimum amount of common sense required to not point a firearm directly at another human being. Gary, however, had a different idea. Gary was the funny one, the prank guy, the kind of person who believes every situation can be improved by adding a little shock value. So he picked up the gun, turned toward Kevin, and pointed it directly at his chest. Kevin laughed nervously, because surely Gary wouldn't actually do anything stupid. Gary grinned and said the 6 most famous last words in the history of Darwin Awards. Relax, it's not loaded. Now, here's the thing about those words. People only say them in 2 situations. Either the gun is absolutely unloaded, or the person saying it never checked. Gary was very confident. So confident, in fact, that he decided to make the prank more dramatic. He pulled the trigger. What Gary expected was a harmless click. What he got instead was a deafening crack. Because the gun was loaded. Very loaded. In that split second, physics, chemistry, and regret all arrived at the exact same time. The bullet traveled faster than Gary's brain could process what had just happened, and struck Kevin directly in the chest. The room went silent. Gary stood there frozen, the smoking gun still in his hand. His joke had landed, just not in the way he imagined. Kevin collapsed. The prank was over. And Gary had just learned the most brutal lesson possible about the difference between a joke and a firearm. Because when it comes to loaded guns, the universe does not have a sense of humor. It has ballistics. Case 8. The ego versus the bench press. Gyms are fascinating places. They're temples of self-improvement, mixed with just enough ego to occasionally create extremely bad decisions. Most people go to the gym to get stronger, healthier, maybe impress someone on Instagram. Hector went for something more important: glory. Hector was a bodybuilder, a very big one. The kind of guy who walked into a room sideways because his shoulders arrived before the rest of him. But like many people chasing strength, Hector had developed a dangerous belief. If the weight is heavy enough, you must attempt it, especially if people are watching. And tonight, Hector had a mission. He was going to break his personal bench press record. For those unfamiliar with the bench press, here's how it works. You lie on a bench, you lower a barbell loaded with heavy plates onto your chest, then you push it back up. It sounds simple, but there is one extremely important safety feature built into this process: a spotter. A spotter stands behind you and helps lift the bar if you fail. In other words, the spotter is the thin line between great workout and local news story. But Hector had a problem with spotters. In his mind, asking for one meant admitting weakness, and Hector's ego was already lifting more weight than his muscles. So he decided to go solo. He loaded the bar, plate after plate, more weight than he had ever attempted before, a weight that made the bar bend slightly under the pressure. The gym was quiet. A few people glanced over. This was going to be a moment. Hector lay down on the bench, gripped the bar, unracked the weight, and slowly lowered it to his chest. So far, so good. The hard part was next. He pushed. The bar moved an inch, 2 inches. His muscles trembled. The bar slowed, then stopped, right above his chest. At that exact moment, Hector experienced the terrifying realization that every lifter eventually fears. The weight was too heavy, and gravity was still undefeated. His arms began shaking violently, his muscles completely exhausted, and with no spotter to help, the bar came down, hard, across his neck, the entire weight of his ambition crashing into his throat in one brutal moment. The gym fell silent. The man who wanted to prove he was the strongest person in the room had been defeated by the one opponent nobody ever beats: physics. Because in weightlifting, there's a rule that every experienced lifter understands. Your ego is always the heaviest weight in the gym. And it's the one you should never try to lift alone. Case 9. The caffeine overclock finals week in college is a very special time. Sleep schedules collapse. Students begin speaking in fragments of half-remembered lecture notes, and caffeine consumption rises to levels normally reserved for jet engines. Most students handle this with a few cups of coffee, maybe an energy drink. Kyle had a slightly different strategy. Kyle had spent the entire semester mastering a very specific academic technique known as procrastination, which meant that the night before his final exam, he faced a terrifying reality. He knew almost nothing. But Kyle wasn't worried, because Kyle had discovered a shortcut: caffeine. Lots of caffeine. On his desk sat an impressive lineup of stimulants: energy drinks, a bottle of caffeine pills, and the unshakable confidence of someone who believed biology was negotiable. Kyle's plan was simple. He would stay awake all night, drink enough caffeine to force his brain into maximum performance mode, and cram an entire semester of information into his skull before sunrise. Now, in theory, caffeine helps with alertness. In reality, Kyle had taken this concept and turned it into a chemistry experiment. The first energy drink went down quickly, then another, then a caffeine pill. At first, it worked. Kyle felt incredible, focused, sharp, like a productivity machine. Words on the page suddenly made sense. His brain felt fast, electric, invincible. But while his brain was celebrating, his body had started sending warning signals. His hands began shaking. His heart was racing. His leg bounced uncontrollably under the desk. His nervous system was being pushed far past anything it was designed to handle. Kyle ignored all of it. More drinks, more pills, more stimulation. By the time the sun started rising, Kyle had consumed a truly heroic amount of caffeine. 10 or 11 energy drinks, several pills, enough stimulants to make a cardiologist wince from across the room. Kyle leaned back in his chair, exhausted but triumphant. He reached for one final can, the victory lap. But his heart had been working overtime for hours, beating faster, harder, trying desperately to keep up with the chemical storm inside his bloodstream. And finally, it failed. Without warning, his heart rhythm collapsed into chaos, a sudden cardiac arrest. Kyle slumped forward at his desk, his head landing directly on the open textbook he had spent all night studying. When his roommate found him the next morning, the room looked like a battlefield. Empty cans everywhere, caffeine bottles scattered across the desk. A silent monument to one man's attempt to hack human biology. Kyle had tried to pass his final exam using pure stimulants, but in the end, he failed the one subject nobody gets a second chance at: basic survival. Case 10. The Piranha Hero. There are many ways a man can try to impress his girlfriend. Flowers, a romantic dinner, maybe a thoughtful compliment. Ricardo chose hand-to-hand combat with a piranha. Our story takes place on a peaceful riverbank in Brazil. The sun is shining, the water is calm. The atmosphere is perfect for a relaxing afternoon. Ricardo and his girlfriend are enjoying the scenery. But Ricardo has a problem. Peaceful afternoons don't make great stories. Ricardo wanted a moment, something legendary. Something that would make his girlfriend look at him and think, wow, this man is unstoppable. And then he saw it, a flash of silver in the water, a piranha. Now, for anyone with basic survival instincts, seeing a piranha usually triggers a simple response: keep your body parts out of the water. But Ricardo's brain processed the situation differently. Instead of danger, he saw opportunity. He turned to his girlfriend and delivered one of the most historically dangerous sentences in human language. Hey, watch this. Those 3 words have started more disasters than faulty engineering. Ignoring her nervous protests, Ricardo stepped into the water. His plan was extremely simple. He was going to catch the piranha with his bare hands. because nothing says alpha male like wrestling a fish with a mouthful of razor blades. He moved slowly, eyes locked on the fish, focused, determined. Then he lunged, and incredibly, it worked. Ricardo pulled his hand out of the water, holding the wriggling fish. He had done it. He held it up proudly, grinning like a man who had just conquered nature itself. For about 3 seconds. Because the piranha had a slightly different opinion about the situation. It immediately bit him. Hard. Now normally, a single piranha bite is painful but survivable. But Ricardo had forgotten one very important detail. Piranhas are not solo players. They are team-oriented. The moment the first drop of blood touched the water, the river basically rang the dinner bell. Within seconds, the calm surface erupted into chaos. Dozens of piranhas swarmed the area. Ricardo's triumphant grin disappeared instantly, because he had accidentally upgraded himself from fisherman to menu item. The attack was fast, violent, completely overwhelming. His girlfriend could only watch in horror as Ricardo's grand attempt at masculine dominance turned into an extremely unfortunate feeding frenzy. Nature had accepted his challenge, and nature had responded with overwhelming force. In the end, Ricardo did achieve what he wanted. He proved he could catch a piranha with his bare hands. Unfortunately, the piranhas proved they could catch him with their teeth. So let's review what we've learned today. If someone challenges you to a scorpion duel, just walk away. If you build a DIY shotgun raccoon trap, write down where you put it. If you're stealing beer, remember that glass doors are solid objects. If you're lifting weights, bring a spotter. If you're studying for finals, your heart is not designed for 10 energy drinks and caffeine pills. And if you ever feel the urge to impress someone by grabbing a piranha with your bare hands, maybe just buy flowers instead. Now I'm curious, out of these 10 absolute masterpieces of bad decision-making, which one made you think, yeah, I could see someone I know doing that? Drop the number in the comments. No judgment, mostly. And if this video convinced you that common sense is still the most important survival skill on Earth, hit the like button, subscribe, and come back next time. Because apparently, humanity